The Steele Dossier.
The Steele Dossier. Collected and compiled by former MI6 counterintelligence officer, Christopher Steele of Great Britain. 22 pages of the 35-page report is provided on this audio. Please excuse errors in pronouncing Russian names. The Trump-Russia dossier, also known as the Steele Dossier, is a private intelligence report written from June to December 2016 containing allegations of misconduct and conspiracy between Donald Trump's presidential campaign and the government of Russia during the 2016 election. The dossier is a 35-page collection of 17 memos based on information from witting and unwitting unnamed sources known to the author, counterintelligence specialist Christopher Steele, a former head of the Russia desk for British intelligence, MI6, written for the private investigative firm Fusion GPS. The report is a compilation of raw intelligence allegations that Trump campaign members and Russian operatives conspired to interfere in the election to benefit Trump. It also alleges that Russia sought to damage Hillary Clinton's candidacy, including sharing negative information about Clinton with the Trump campaign. The dossier was published in full by BuzzFeed on January 10, 2017. Several mainstream media outlets criticized BuzzFeed's decision to release it without verifying its allegations, while others defended its release. In October 2015, Fusion GPS was contracted by the conservative and Republican political website The Washington Free Beacon to provide general opposition research on Trump to other Republican presidential candidates. In April 2016, an attorney for Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC separately hired Fusion GPS to investigate Trump, while the Free Beacon stopped its backing in May of 2016. In June 2016, Fusion GPS subcontracted Steele's firm to compile the dossier. DNC officials denied knowing their attorney had contracted with Fusion GPS, and Steele asserted he was not aware the Clinton campaign was the recipient of his research until months after he contracted with Fusion GPS. Following Trump's election as president, funding from Clinton and the DNC ceased, but Steele continued his research and was reportedly paid directly by Fusion GPS co-founder Glenn R. Simpson. While compiling the dossier, Steele passed information to both British and American intelligence, including the FBI, CIA, and Senator John McCain.
To date, none of the Steele dossier has been proven inaccurate, despite Trump and Republicans' best efforts to cast doubt on this credible intelligence report.
The Steele Dossier, Report Number 1. Company Intelligence Report 2016/080. U.S. Presidential Election. Republican candidate Donald Trump's activities in Russia and compromising relationship with the Kremlin. Summary. Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years. Aim, endorsed by Putin, has been to encourage splits and divisions in the Western alliance. So far, Trump has declined various sweetener real estate business deals offered him in Russia in order to further the Kremlin's cultivation of him. However, he and his inner circle have accepted a regular flow of intelligence from the Kremlin, including on his Democratic and other political rivals. Former top Russian intelligence officer claims FSB has compromised Trump through his activities in Moscow sufficiently to be able to blackmail him. According to several knowledgeable sources, his conduct in Moscow has included, redacted by the Moscow Project, arranged or monitored by the FSB. A dossier of compromising material on Hillary Clinton has been collated by the Russian intelligence services over many years and mainly comprises bugged conversations she had on various visits to Russia and intercepted phone calls rather than any embarrassing conduct. The dossier is controlled by Kremlin spokesman Peskov, directly by Putin's orders. However, it has not yet been distributed abroad, including to Trump. Russian intentions for this deployment are still unclear. Detail. Speaking to a trusted compatriot in June 2016, sources A and B, a senior Russian foreign ministry figure and a foreign top-level Russian intelligence officer, still active inside the Kremlin respectively, the Russian authorities have been cultivating and supporting U.S. Republican president candidate Donald Trump for at least 5 years. Source B asserted that the Trump operation has both supported and has been directed by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Its aim was to sow discord and disunity both within the U.S. itself, but more especially within the transatlantic alliance, which was viewed as inimical to Russia's interests. Source C, a senior Russian financial officer, said the Trump operation should be seen in terms of Putin's desire to return to 19th century great power politics anchored upon countries' interests rather than the ideals-based international order established after World War II. She or he had overheard Putin talking in this way to close associates on several occasions. Number 2, in terms of specifics, Source A confided that the Kremlin had been feeding Trump and his team valuable intelligence on his opponents, including Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, for several years. See more below. This was confirmed by Source D, a close associate of Trump who had organized and managed his recent trips to Moscow, and who reported also in June 2016 that this Russian intelligence had been very helpful. The Kremlin's cultivation operation on Trump also had comprised offering him various lucrative real estate development business deals in Russia, especially in relation to the ongoing 2018 World Cup soccer tournament. However, so far, for reasons unknown, Trump had not taken up on any of these. Number 3. However, there were other aspects to Trump's engagement with the Russian authorities. One which had borne fruit for them was to exploit Trump's personal obsessions and, redacted by the Moscow Project, in order to obtain suitable compromising material on him. According to Source D, where she or he had been present, Trump's, redacted by the Moscow Project, conduct in Moscow included hiring a presidential suite of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, where he knew President and Mrs. Obama, whom he hated, had stayed on one of their official trips to Russia, and, redacted by the Moscow Project, the hotel was known to be under FSB control with microphones and concealed cameras in all the main rooms to record anything they wanted to. Number 4. The Moscow Ritz-Carlton episode involving Trump reported above was confirmed by Source E, redacted by BuzzFeed News, who said that she or he and several of the staff were aware of it at the time and subsequently. She or he believed it had happened in 2013. Source E provided an introduction for a company ethnic Russian operative to Source F, a female staffer in the hotel where Trump had stayed there, who also confirmed the story. Speaking separately in 2016, June, Source B, the former top-level Russian intelligence officer, asserted that Trump's unorthodox behavior in Russia over the years had provided the authorities there with enough embarrassing material on the now Republican presidential candidate to be able to blackmail him if they so wished. Number 5. Asked about the Kremlin's reported intelligence feed to Trump over recent years and rumors about Russian dossier of compromise on Hillary Clinton, being circulated. Source B confirmed the file's existence. She or he confided in a trusted compatriot that it had been collated by Department K of the FSB for many years, dating back to her husband Bill's presidency, and comprised mainly over eavesdropping conversations of various sorts rather than details evidence of unorthodox and embarrassing behavior. Some of the conversations were bugged comments Clinton had made on her various trips to Russia, and focused on things she had said which contradicted her current positions on various issues. Others were most probably from phone intercepts. Number 6. Continuing on this theme, Source G, a senior Kremlin official, confided that the Clinton dossier was controlled exclusively by Chief Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who was responsible for compiling and handling it on the explicit instructions of Putin. The dossier, however, had not as yet been made available abroad, including to Trump or his campaign team. At present, it was unclear what Putin's intentions were in this regard. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 2, 20th of June, 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/086. Russia Cyber Crime. Synopsis of Russian state-sponsored another cyber offensive. Criminal operations. Summary. Russia has an extensive program of state-sponsored offensive cyber operations. External targets include foreign governments and big corporations, especially banks. FSB leads on cyber within Russian apparatus. Limited success in attacking top foreign targets like G7 governments, security services, and IFIs, but much more on second-tier ones through IT backdoors. Using corporate and other visitors to Russia, FSB often uses coercion and blackmail to recruit most capable cyber operatives in Russia into its state-sponsored programs. Heavy use also, both wittingly and unwittingly, of CIS emigres working in Western corporations and ethnic Russians employed by neighboring governments, for example, Latvia. Examples cited of successful Russian cyber operation targeting senior Western business visitor, provided backdoor into important Western institutions. Example given of U.S. citizen of Russian origin approached by FSB and offered incentive of investment in his business when visiting Moscow. Problems, however, for Russian authorities themselves in countering local hackers and cyber criminals operating outside state control. Central Bank claims there were over 20 serious attacks on correspondent accounts held by CBR in 2015, comprising rubles several billions in fraud. Some details are given of leading non-state Russian cyber criminal groups. Details. Number 1. Speaking in June 2016, a number of Russian figures with a detailed knowledge of national cybercrime, both state-sponsored and otherwise, outlined the current situation in this area. A former intelligence officer divided Russian state-sponsored offensive cyber operations into 4 categories in order of priority: targeting foreign, especially Western governments; penetrating leading foreign business corporations, especially banks; domestic monitoring of the elite; and attacking political opponents both at home and abroad. The former intelligence officer reported that the Federal Security Service, FSB, was the lead organization within the Russian state apparatus for cyber operations. Number 2. In terms of this success of Russian offensive cyber operations to date, a senior government figure reported that there had been only limited success in penetrating the first-tier foreign targets. These comprised Western, especially G7 and NATO governments, security intelligence services and central banks and IFIs. To compensate for this shortfall, massive effort had been invested, with much greater success, in attacking the secondary targets, particularly Western private banks and the governments of small states allied to the West. She or he mentioned in Latvia in this regard. Hundreds of agents, either consciously cooperating with the FSB or whose personal and professional IT systems had been unwittingly compromised, were recruited. Many were people who had ethnic and family ties to Russia and or had been incentivized financially to cooperate. Such people often would receive monetary inducements or contractual favors from the Russian state or its agents in return. This had created difficulties for parts of the Russian state apparatus in indulging them, as in the Central Bank of Russia, knowingly having to cover up for such agents' money laundering operations through the Russian financial system. Number 3. In terms of the FSB's recruitment of capable cyber operatives to carry out its ideally deniable offensive cyber operations, a Russian IT specialist with direct knowledge reported in June 2016 that this was done using coercion and blackmail. In terms of foreign agents, the FSB was approaching U.S. citizens for Russian, Jewish origin on business trips to Russia. In one case, a U.S. citizen of Russian ethnicity had been visiting Moscow to attract investors in his new information technology program. The FSB clearly knew this and had offered to provide seed capital to this person in return for them being able to access and modify his IP, with a view to targeting priority foreign targets by planting a Trojan virus in the software. The U.S. visitor was told this was common practice. The FSB also had implied significant operational success as a result of installing cheap Russian IT games containing their own malware unwittingly by targets on their PCs and other platforms. Number 4. In a more advanced and successful FSB operation, an IT operator inside a leading Russian SOE, who previously had been employed on conventional defensive IT work there, had been under instruction for the last year to conduct a defensive cyber operation against the foreign director of the company. Although the latter was apparently an infrequent visitor to Russia, the FSB now successfully had penetrated his personal IT, and through this and managed to access various important institutions in the West through the back door. Number 5. In terms of other technical IT platforms, an FSB cyber operative flagged up the Telegram enciphered commercial system as having been of special concern, and therefore heavily targeted by the FSB, not least because it was used frequently by Russian internal political activities and oppositionists. His or her understanding was that the FSB now successfully had cracked this communication software, and therefore it was no longer secure to use. The senior Russian government figure cited above was reported that non-state-sponsored cybercrime was becoming an increasing problem inside Russia for the government and authorities there. The Central Bank of Russia claimed that in 2015 alone, there had been more than 20 attempts to serious cyber embezzlement of money from corresponding accounts held there, comprising several billion rubles. More generally, she or he understood there were around 15 major organized crime groups in the country involved in this cybercrime, all of which continue to operate largely outside state and FSB control. These included the so-called Anunnaki, Buktrop, and Mittel organizations. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 3. Company Intelligence Report 2016/095. Russia, U.S. presidential election. Further indications of extensive conspiracy between Trump's campaign team and the Kremlin. Summary. Further evidence of extensive conspiracy between campaign team and Kremlin, sanctioned at highest levels and involving Russian diplomatic staff based in the U.S. Trump associate admits Kremlin behind recent appearance of DNC emails on WikiLeaks as means of maintaining plausible deniability. Agreed exchange of information established in both directions. Trump's team using moles within the DNC and hackers in the U.S. as well as outside in Russia. Putin motivated by fear and hatred of Hillary Clinton. Russians receiving intel from Trump's team on Russian oligarchs and their families in the U.S. Mechanism for transmitting this intelligence involves pension disbursements of Russian immigrants living in the U.S. as cover, using consular offices in New York, D.C., and Miami. Suggestion from source close to Trump and Manafort that Republican campaign team happy to have Russia as media boogeyman to mask more extensive corrupt business ties to China and other emerging countries. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in confidence to a compatriot in late July 2016, Source E, an ethnic Russian close associate of Republican U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump, admitted there was a well-developed conspiracy of cooperation between them and the Russian leadership. This was managed on the Trump side by the Republican candidate's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who was using foreign policy advisor Carter Page and other intermediaries. The two sides had a mutual interest in defeating the Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, whom President Putin apparently both hated and feared. Number 2. Inter alia, Source E, acknowledged that the Russian regime had been behind the recent leak of embarrassing email messages emanating from the Democratic National Committee, DNC, to WikiLeaks platform. The reason for using WikiLeaks was plausible deniability, and the operation had been conducted with full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. In return, the Trump team had agreed to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue and to raise U.S. NATO defense commitments in the Baltics and Eastern Europe to deflect attention away from Ukraine, a priority for Putin, who needed to cauterize the subject. Number 3. In the wider context of Trump campaign Kremlin cooperation, Source E claimed that the intelligence network being used against Clinton comprised 3 elements. Firstly, there were agents, facilitators within the Democratic Party structure itself. Secondly, Russian immigrant and associated offensive cyber operations based in the U.S. And thirdly, state-sponsored cyber operatives working in Russia. All 3 elements had played an important role to date. On the mechanism of rewarding relevant assets based in the U.S. and affecting a two-way flow of intelligence and other useful information, Source E claimed that Russian diplomatic staff in key cities such as New York, Washington, D.C., and Miami were using the immigrant pension distribution system as cover. The operation, therefore, depended on key people in the U.S. Russian immigrant community for its success. Tens of thousands of dollars were involved. Number 4, in terms of the intelligence flow from the Trump team to Russia, Source E reported that much of this concerned the activities of the business oligarchs and their families' activities and assets in the U.S., with which Putin and the Kremlin seemed preoccupied. Number 5. Commenting on the negative media publicity surrounding alleged Russian interference in the U.S. election campaign in support of Trump, Source E said he understood that the Republican candidate and his team were relatively relaxed about this because it deflected media and the Democrats' attention away from Trump's business dealings in China and other emerging markets. Unlike Russia, these were substantial and involved the payment of large bribes and kickbacks, which were they to become public would be potentially very damaging to the campaign. Number 6, finally, regarding Trump's claimed minimal investment profile in Russia, a separate source with direct knowledge said this had not been for want of trying. Trump's previous efforts had included exploring the real estate sector in St. Petersburg as well as Moscow, but in the end, Trump had to settle for the use of, redacted by the Moscow Project, rather than business success. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 4. Company Intelligence Report 2016/94. Russia, secret Kremlin meetings attended by Trump advisor Carter Page in Moscow, July 2016. Summary. Trump advisor Carter Page holds secret meetings in Moscow with Sechin and senior Kremlin internal affairs official Devyakin. Sechin raises issues of future bilateral U.S.-Russia energy cooperation and associated lifting of Western sanctions against Russia over Ukraine. Page non-committal in response. Devyakin discusses release of Russian dossier of compromise on Trump's opponent Hillary Clinton, but also hints at Kremlin possession of such material on Trump. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in July 2016, a Russian source close to Rosneft President Putin, close associate and U.S. sanctioned individual Igor Sechin, confided the details of recent secret meetings between him and visiting foreign affairs to Republican candidate Donald Trump. Carter Page. Number 2. According to Sechin's associate, the Rosneft president, CEO, had raised with Page the issue of future bilateral energy cooperation and prospects for an associated move to lift Ukraine-related Western sanctions against Russia. Page had reacted positively to this remark by Sechin and had been generally non-committal in response. Number 3. Speaking separately also in July 2016, an official close to presidential administration head Ivanov confided in a compatriot that a senior colleague in the internal political department of the PA, Devyakin, NFD, also had met secretly with Page on his recent visit. Their agenda included Devyakin raising a dossier of compromise the Kremlin possessed on Democratic presidential rival Hillary Clinton and its possible release to the Republican campaign team. Number 4. However, the Kremlin official close to Ivanov added that she or he believed Devyakin also had hinted or indicated more strongly that the Russian leadership also had compromise on Trump, which the latter should bear in mind in his dealings with them. Steele Dossier, Report Number 5. 19th of July, 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/097. Russia, U.S. presidential election. Kremlin concerned that political fallout from DNC email hacking affair spiraling out of control. Summary. Kremlin concerned that political fallout from DNC email hacking operation is spiraling out of control. Extreme nervousness among Trump's associates as a result of negative media attention and accusations. Russians meanwhile keen to cool situation and maintain plausible deniability of existing ongoing pro-Trump and anti-Clinton operations. Therefore, unlikely to be ratcheting up offensive plays in the immediate future. Source close to Trump campaign, however, confirms regular exchange with Kremlin has existed for at least 8 years, including intelligence fed back to Russia on oligarchs' activities in U.S. Russians apparently have promised not to use compromise they hold on Trump as leverage, given high levels of voluntary cooperation forthcoming from his team. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in confidence to a trusted associate in late 2016, July, a Russian emigre figure close to the Republican U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump's campaign team commented on the fallout from publicity surrounding the Democratic National Committee DNC email hacking scandal. The emigre said there was a high level of anxiety within the Trump team as a result of various accusations leveled against them and indications from the Kremlin and that President Putin and others in the leadership thought things had gone too far now and risked spiraling out of control. Number 2. Continuing on this theme, the emigre associate of Trump opined that the Kremlin wanted the situation to calm but for plausible deniability to be maintained concerning its extensive pro-Trump anti-Clinton operations. She or he therefore judged that it was unlikely these would be ratcheted up, at least for the time being. Number 3. However, in terms of established operational liaison between Trump and the Trump team and the Kremlin, the emigre confirmed that an intelligence exchange had been running between them for at least 8 years. Within this context, Putin's priority requirement had been for intelligence on the activities, business and otherwise, in the U.S. of leading Russian oligarchs and their families. Trump and his associates duly had obtained and supplied the Kremlin with this information. Number 4. Finally, the emigre said she or he understood the Kremlin had more intelligence on Clinton and her campaign, but he did not know the details of when or if it would be released. As far as compromising information on Trump were concerned, although there was plenty of this, he understood the Kremlin had given its word that it would not be deployed against the Republican presidential candidate, given how helpful and cooperative his team had been over several years, and particularly of late. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 6, 30th of July 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/100. Russia, USA, growing backlash in Kremlin to DNC hacking and Trump support operations. Summary. Head of PA, Ivanov, laments Russian intervention in U.S. presidential election and black PR against Clinton and the DNC. Vows not to supply intelligence to Kremlin PR operatives again. Advocates now sitting tight and denying everything. Presidential spokesman Peskov, the main protagonist in Kremlin campaign to aid Trump and damage Clinton, He is now scared and fears being made scapegoat by leadership for backlash in the U.S., problem compounded by his botched intervention in recent Turkish crisis. Premier Medvedev's office furious over DNC hacking and associated anti-Russian publicity. Want good relations with U.S. and ability to travel there. Refusing to support to help cover up for Peskov. Talk now in Kremlin of Trump withdrawing from presidential race altogether, but this is still largely a wishful thinking by more liberal elements in Moscow. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in early August 2016, two well-placed established Kremlin sources outlined the divisions and backlash in Moscow arising from the leaking of Democratic National Committee (DNC) emails and the wider pro-Trump operation being conducted in the U.S. Head of Presidential Administration Sergei Ivanov was angry at the recent turn of events. He believed the Kremlin team involved, led by presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov, had gone too far in intervening in foreign affairs with their elephant in the china shop, black PR. Ivanov claimed always to have opposed the handling and exploitation of intelligence by his PR team. Following the backlash against such foreign interference in U.S. politics, Ivanov was advocating that the only sensible course of action now was for the Russian leadership was to sit tight and deny everything. Number 2. Continuing on this theme, the source close to Ivanov reported that the Peskov now was scared shitless that he would be scapegoated by the Putin and the Kremlin and held responsible for the backlash against Russian political interference in the U.S. election. Ivanov was determined to stop Peskov playing an independent role in relation to the U.S. going forward, and the source fully expected the presidential spokesman now to lay low. Peskov's position was not helped by a botched attempt by him also to interfere in the recent failed coup in Turkey from a government relations (GR) perspective. No further details. Number 3. The extent of the disquiet and division within Moscow caused by the backlash against Russian interference in the U.S. election was undermined by second source close to Premier Dmitry Medvedev. She said the Russian regime, or Prime Minister, and his colleagues wanted to have good relations with the U.S. regardless of who was in power there, and not least as to who is able to travel there in the future, either officially or privately. They were openly refusing to cover up for Peskov and others involved in the DNC Trump operations, or to support the counterattack of allegations against the USG for its alleged hacking of Russian government and state agencies. Number 4. According to the first source, close to Ivanov, there had been talk in the Kremlin of Trump being forced to withdraw from the presidential race altogether as a result of the recent events, ostensibly on grounds of his state and unsuitability for high office. This might not be so bad for Russia in the circumstances, but in the view of the source, it remained largely wishful thinking on the part of those in the regime opposed to Peskov and the botched operations, at least for the time being. Steele Dossier, Report Number 7, 5th of August 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/101. Russia U.S. presidential election. Senior Kremlin figure outlines evolving Russian tactics in pro-Trump anti-Clinton operation. Summary. Head of PA, Ivanov, assesses Kremlin intervention in U.S. presidential election and outlines leadership thinking on operational way forward. No new leaks envisaged as too politically risky, but rather further exploitation of WikiLeaks material already disseminated to exacerbate divisions. Educated U.S. youth to be targeted as protest against Clinton and swing vote in an attempt to turn them over to Trump. Russian leadership, including Putin, celebrating perceived success to date in splitting U.S. hawks and elite. Kremlin engaging with several high-profile U.S. players, including Stein, Page, and former DIA Director Michael Flynn, in funding their recent visit to Moscow. Details. Number 1. Speaking in confidence to a close colleague in early August 2016, head of Russian Presidential Administration PA, Sergei Ivanov, assessed the impact and results of Kremlin intervention in the U.S. presidential election to date. Although most commentators believe that Moscow was behind the leaked DNC Clinton emails, this remained technically deniable. Therefore, the Russians would not risk their position for the time being, and new leaked material even to the third party like WikiLeaks. Rather, the tactic would be to spread rumors and misinformation about the content of what already had been leaked and make up new content. Number 2. Continuing on this theme, Ivanov said that the audience was to be targeted by such operations was the educated youth in America, and as the PA assessed that there was still a chance they could be persuaded to vote for Republican candidate Donald Trump as a protest against the Washington establishment in the form of Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. The hope was that even if she won, as a result of this, Clinton in power would be bogged down in working for internal reconciliation in the U.S., rather than being able to focus on foreign policy which would damage Russia's interest. This also should give President Putin more room to maneuver to run up to Russia's own presidential election in 2018. Number 3, Ivanov reported that although the Kremlin had underestimated the strength of the U.S. media and liberal reaction to the DNC hack and Trump's links to Russia, Putin was generally satisfied with the progress of the anti-Clinton operation to date. He recently had a drink with Putin to mark this. In Ivanov's view, the U.S. had tried to divide the Russian elite with sanctions but failed, whilst they, by contrast, had succeeded in splitting the U.S. hawks inimical to Russia and the Washington elite more generally, half of whom had refused to endorse any presidential candidates as a result of the Russian intervention. Number 4. Speaking separately, also in early August 2016, a Kremlin official involved in U.S. relations commented on aspects of the Russian operation to date. Its goals had been threefold: asking sympathetic U.S. actors how Moscow could help them, gathering relevant intelligence, and creating and disseminating compromising information, compromat. This had involved the Kremlin supporting the various U.S. political figures, including funding indirectly their recent visits to Moscow. She or he named as a delegation from Lyndon LaRouche, presidential candidate Jill Stein of the Green Party, Trump foreign policy advisor Carter Page, and former DIA director Michael Flynn. In this regard, is successful in terms of perceived outcomes. The Steele Dossier, report number 8, 10th of August 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/102. Russia, U.S. presidential election. Reaction to Trump camp to recent negative publicity about Russian interference and likely resulting tactics going forward. Summary: Trump campaign insider reports recent DNC email leaks were aimed at switching Sanders protest voters away from Clinton and over to Trump. Admits Republican campaign underestimated resulting negative reaction from U.S. liberals, elite, and media, and forced to change course as a result. Need now to turn tables on Clinton's use of Putin as boogeyman in election. Although some resentment at Russian president's perceived attempt to undermine USG and system over and above swinging presidential election. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in confidence on 9 August 2016, an ethnic Russian associate of Republican U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump discussed the reaction inside his camp and revised tactics therein resulting from recent negative publicity concerning Moscow's clandestine involvement in the campaign. Trump's associate reported that the aim of leaking the DNC email to WikiLeaks during the Democrat convention had been to swing supporters of Bernie Sanders away from Hillary Clinton and across to Trump. These voters were perceived as activists and anti-status quo and anti-establishment, and in that regard sharing many features with the Trump campaign, including a visceral dislike of Hillary Clinton. This objective had been conceived and promoted inter alia by Trump's foreign policy advisor Carter Page, who had discussed it directly with the ethnic Russian associate. Number 2, continuing in this theme, the ethnic Russian associate of Trump assessed the problem was that Trump campaign had underestimated the strength of the negative reaction from liberals and especially the conservative elite to Russian interference. This was forcing a rethink and a likely change of tactics. The main objective in the short term was to check Democrat candidate Hillary Clinton's successful exploitation of Putin as a boogeyman Russian interference story to tarnish Trump and to bolster her own patriotic credentials. The Trump campaign was focusing on tapping into support in the American television media to achieve this, as they reckon this resource had been underused by them to date. Number 3, however, Trump's associate also admitted that there was a fair amount of anger and resentment within the Republican candidate's team at what was perceived by Putin as going beyond the objective of weakening Clinton and bolstering Trump by attempting to exploit the situation to undermine the U.S. government and democratic system more generally. It was unclear at present how this aspect of the situation would play out in the weeks to come. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 9, 10th of August 2016. Company Intelligence Reports 2016/136. Russia, U.S. presidential election. Further details of Trump lawyer Cohen's secret meetings liaison with the Kremlin. Summary. Kremlin insider reports Trump lawyer Cohen's secret meetings with Kremlin officials in August 2016 was or were held in Prague. Russian Aristotle organization
Сотрудничество.
uses cover for this liaison, and premises in Czech capital may have been used for meetings. Pro-Putin leading Duma figure Kosachev reportedly involved as plausible deniable facilitator and may have participated in the August meetings with Cohen. Detail. Number 1. Speaking to a compatriot and friend on 19 August 2016, a Kremlin insider provided further details of reported clandestine meetings between Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's lawyer Michael Cohen and Kremlin representatives in August 2016. Although the communication between them had to be cryptic for security reasons, the Kremlin insider clearly indicated to his or her friend that the reported contacts took place in Prague, Czech Republic. Number 2. Continuing on this theme, the Kremlin insider highlighted the importance of the Russian Perestotle organization
Сотрудничество.
in this contact between Trump campaign representatives and Kremlin officials.
Сотрудничество.
Was being used as cover for this relationship, and its office in Prague may well have been used to host the Cohen Russian Presidential Administration PA meetings. It was considered a plausible deniable vehicle for this, whilst remaining entirely under Kremlin control. Number 3. The Kremlin insider went on to identify leading pro-Putin Duma figure Konstantin Kosachev, head of the Foreign Relations Committee, as an important figure in the Trump campaign Kremlin liaison operation. Kosachev, also plausible deniable, being part of the Russian legislature rather than the executive, had facilitated the contact in Prague and by implication may have attended the meetings with Cohen there in August 2016. Company comment. We reported previously in our Company Intelligence Report 2016/135 of 19 October 2016 from the same source that Cohen met officials from the PA legal department clandestinely in a EU country in August 2016. This was in order to clean up the mess left behind by Western media revelations of Trump ex-campaign manager Manafort's corrupt relationship with the former pro-Russian Yanukovych regime in Ukraine, and Trump foreign policy advisor Carter Page's secret meetings in Moscow with senior regime figures in July 2016. According to the Kremlin advisor, these meetings were originally scheduled for Cohen in Moscow, but shifted to what was considered to be operationally soft EU country when it was judged too compromising for him to travel to the Russian capital. The Steele Dossier Report Number 10, 20th of October 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/105. Russia, Ukraine, the demise of Trump's campaign manager Paul Manafort. Summary. Ex-Ukrainian President Yanukovych confides directly to Putin that he authorized kickback payments to Manafort as alleged in Western media. Assures Russian president, however, there is no documentary evidence or trail. Putin and Russian leadership remain worried, however, and skeptical that Yanukovych has fully covered the traces of these payments to Trump's former campaign manager. Close associates of Trump explains reasoning behind Manafort's recent resignation. Ukraine revelations played part, but others wanted Manafort out for various reasons, especially Lewandowski, who remains influential. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in late 2016, in the immediate aftermath of Paul Manafort's resignation as campaign manager for U.S. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, a well-placed Russian figure reported on a recent meeting between President Putin and ex-President Yanukovych of Ukraine. This had been held in secret on 15th of August near Volgograd, Russia, and the Western media revelations about Manafort in Ukraine had featured prominently on the agenda. Yanukovych had confided in Putin that he did authorize and order substantial kickback payments to Manafort, as alleged, but sought to reassure him that there was no documentary trail left behind which could provide clear evidence of this. Number 2, given Yanukovych's unimpressive record in covering up his own corrupt tracks in the past, Putin and others in the Russian leadership were skeptical about the ex-Ukrainian president's reassurances, as this is related to Manafort. They therefore still feared the scandal had legs, especially as Manafort had been commercially active in Ukraine right up to the time in March 2016 when he joined Trump's campaign team. For them, it therefore remained a point of potential political vulnerability and embarrassment. Number 3. Speaking separately, also in late 2016, an American political figure associated with Donald Trump and his campaign outlined the reasons behind Manafort's recent demise. She or he said it was true that the Ukraine corruption revelations had played a part in this, but also several senior players close to Trump had wanted Manafort out, primarily to loosen his control on strategy and policy formulation. Of particular importance in this regard was Manafort's predecessor as campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who hated Manafort personally and had remained close to Trump, with whom he discussed the presidential campaign on a regular basis. The Steele Dossier, report number 11, 22 August 2016. Company Intelligence Report 2016/111. Russia, U.S. Kremlin fallout from media exposure of Moscow's interference in U.S. presidential campaign. Summary. Kremlin orders senior staff to remain silent in media and private on allegations of Russian interference in U.S. presidential campaign. Senior figure, however, confirms gist of allegations and reports. Ivanov sacked as head of administration on account of giving Putin poor advice on issue. Vano selected as his replacement partly because he was not involved in pro-Trump, anti-Clinton operations. Russians do have further compromise on Clinton emails and considering disseminating it after Duma legislative elections in late September. Presidential spokesman Peskov continues to lead on this. However, equally important is Kremlin's objective to shift policy consensus favorably to Russia in U.S. post-Obama, whoever wins. Both presidential candidates' opposition to TPP and TTIP viewed as a result of this in this respect. Senior Russian diplomat withdrawn from Washington embassy on account of a potential exposure in U.S. presidential election operations. Detail. Number 1. Speaking in confidence to a trusted compatriot in mid-September 2016, a senior member of the Russian presidential administration, PA, commented on the political fallout from recent Western media revelations about Moscow's intervention in favor of Donald Trump and against Hillary Clinton in the U.S. presidential election. The PA official reported that the issue had become incredibly sensitive and that President Putin had issued direct orders to Kremlin and government insiders should not discuss it in public or even in private. Despite this, the PA official confirmed, from direct knowledge, that the gist of allegations was true. Putin had been receiving conflicting advice on interfering with 3 separate and expert groups. On one side had been the Russian ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with an independent and informal network run by Presidential Foreign Policy Advisor Yuri Ushakov, Kislyak's predecessor in Washington, who had urged caution and the potential negative impact on Russia from organizations. On the one side was former PA head Sergei Ivanov, backed by Russian Foreign Intelligence SVR, who had advised Putin and pro-Trump and anti-Clinton operations would be both effective and plausibly deniable with little blowback. The first groups had been proven right, and this had been the catalyst in Putin's decision to sack Ivanov unexpectedly as PA head in August. His successor, Anton Vaino, had been selected for the job partly because he had not been involved in U.S. presidential election operations. Number 3. Continuing on this theme, the senior PA official said the situation was that the Kremlin had further compromised on candidate Clinton, had been considering releasing this via plausible deniable channels after the Duma legislative elections were out of the way in mid-September. There was, however, a growing train of thought and associated lobby arguing that the Russians could still make candidate Clinton look weak and stupid by provoking her and railing against Putin and Russia without the need to release more of her emails. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov remained the key figure in this operation, although any decision on the dissemination of further material would be taken by Putin. Number 4. The senior PA official also reported that the growing element in Moscow's intervention in the U.S. presidential election campaign was the objective of the shifting and U.S. political consensus in Russia's perceived interest regarding of who won. It basically comprised of pushing candidate Clinton away from President Obama's policies. The best example of this was that both candidates now openly opposed the draft trade agreements TPP and TTIP, which were assessed by Moscow as detrimental to Russian interests. Other issues where the Kremlin was looking to shift the U.S. policy consensus were Ukraine and Syria. Overall, however, the presidential election was considered still to be too close to call. Number 5. Finally, speaking separately to the same compatriot, a senior Russian MFA official reported that as a prophylactic measure, a leading Russian diplomat, Mikhail Kulagin, had been withdrawn from Washington at short notice because Moscow feared his heavy involvement in the U.S. presidential election operation, including the so-called Veterans Pensions Ruse, reportedly previously, would be exposed in the media there. His replacement, Andrei Bondarev, however, was clean in this regard. Company comment. The substance of what was reported by the senior Russian PA official in paragraphs 1 and 2 above, including the reasons for Sergei Ivanov's dismissal, was corroborated independently by a former top-level Russian intelligence officer and Kremlin insider, also in mid-September. The Steele Dossier, Report Number 12, 14th of September, 2016. Company Intelligence Report, 2016/112. Presidential Election, Kremlin Alpha Group Operation, September 14, 2016. Summary. Top-level Russian official confirms current closeness of Alpha Group Putin relationship. Significant favors continue to be done in both directions, and Friedman and Avon still giving informal advice to Putin, especially on the U.S. Key intermediary in Putin-Alpha relationship identified as Oleg Govron, Currently head of Presidential Administration Department, but throughout the 1990s, the office executive who delivered illicit cash directly to Putin. Putin personally unbothered about Alpha's current lack of investment in Russia, but under pressure from colleagues over this and able to exploit it as a lever over Alpha interrogatories. Detail. Number 1. Speaking to a trusted compatriot in mid-September 2016, a top-level Russian government official commented on the history and current state of relations between President Putin and the Alpha Group of businesses led by oligarchs Mikhail Friedman, Peter Avin, and German Kahn. The Russian government figure reported that although they had their ups and downs, the leading figures of Alpha currently were on very good terms with Putin. Significant favors continue to be done in both directions, primarily political ones for Putin, and business and legal ones for Alpha. Also, Friedman and Avin continue to give informal advice to Putin on foreign policy, and especially about the U.S., where the distrusted advice being given to him by officials. Number 2, although Friedman recently had met directly with Putin in Russia, much of the dialogue and business between them was mediated through senior presidential administration official Oleg Govoron, who currently headed the department and therein responsible for social cooperation with the CIS. Govoron was trusted by Putin and recently had accompanied him to Uzbekistan to pay respects to the tomb of the former President Karimov. However, according to the top-level Russian government official during the 1990s, Govoron had been head of government relations at Alpha Group and in reality the driver and bag carrier used by Friedman and Avin to deliver large amounts of illicit cash to the Russian president, at the time deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. Given that and the continuing sensitivity of the relationship and need for a plausible deniability, much of the contact between them was now indirect and entrusted to the relatively low-profile Govoron. The top-level Russian government official described the Putin-Alpha relationship as both carrot and stick. Alpha held compromise on Putin and his corrupt business activities from the 1990s, whilst although not personally overly bothered by Alpha's failure to reinvest the proceeds of its TNK oil company sale into the Russian economy since, the Russian president was able to use pressure on this account from several Kremlin colleagues as a lever on Friedman and Avin to make them do his political bidding. British MI6 officer Christopher Steele did a great service for the whole world. It's an absolute lie put out by the Republican Party that the Steele Dossier is what triggered the FBI's investigation of Russia interfering with the U.S. 2016 election. It's also a big fat lie that the dossier is inaccurate. It's a lie that Christopher Steele's investigations were solely funded by the Democratic National Committee, DNC, and Hillary Clinton. The truth is that the Fusion GPS was funded at the start, by Jeb Bush's campaign and other Republican candidates. The DNC lawyer didn't get into the game until later. But the lies continue. The nation's eaten up by lies. We live in the most dangerous period in American history because of Trump and his delusional horde of cult followers. My narrating ability is obviously not up to par, but you can read it closely for yourself, then study what's behind the dossier. Read the book Crime in Progress Inside the Steele Dossier and the Fusion GPS Investigation of Donald Trump by Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritz.